Please watch this video regarding $234 million being flushed down the toilet on purpose, by design, by the City and County of Honolulu, the Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transportation, and the mayor, the previous mayor, being Mayor Carlisle.
All this resolution does is say, on behalf of the taxpayer, we've been apprised that we could save money. Please, Mr. Mayor, take action and save us money. That's all this does. There's no spin in this language. None. So deferral will, in essence, when I hear the vote cast, I will hear the toilet flush. And I will watch $234 million go down the drain.
You think I'm licked? You all think I'm licked. Well, I'm not licked. And I'm going to stay right here and fight for this lost cause, even if this room gets filled with lies like these. There's no place out there for graft or greed or lies.
Well, here at home, the fight to reverse a billion-dollar rail contract turned into an attack on integrity today. Hawaii News Now's Tim Sakahara joins us with the details. Tim?
Well, Sean, it was the city's attorneys versus Bombardier, with both testifying the other is wrong. Bombardier says its bid was the lowest by $234 million, but their offer was disqualified because they wanted a cap on liability, which would mean taxpayers would be on the hook if the contractor failed to deliver. Now, the city wasn't willing to compromise, but Bombardier says the contract language is flawed and the city does not understand the liability law.
The city basically asked for a contract for apples and Bombardier proposed oranges.
This whole issue of liability is totally misunderstood by the city.
If I had a box of Kleenex, I would have left the room. I'm in tears. I am really in tears, sir. I can't believe the way this city has treated you. The lawyers are feeding off the trough, the taxpayers' trough, and I'm livid right now. I'm trying to hold back.
Sure, I will support.
The committee voted to defer the issue after all of that. However, Bombardier still has options. It has a request for rebid with the Federal Transit Administration, and it can also appeal in court. Tim Sakahara, Hawaii News Now.
Some city council members want a do-over when it comes to the contract to build the rail cars, saying it's in the best interest of taxpayers. And while the city agrees, it's not answering the why. Hawaii News Now's Tim Sakahara has more.
To use a football analogy, Councilman Tom Berg wants a replay on rail.
If the referee made a bad call on the field, it's our job to review this. It's our job to oversee that maybe they got the call wrong.
He says Bombardier Transportation got robbed. Their bid is $234 million less, and they would have built the rail cars in Hawaii and created 150 local jobs. But they were disqualified, and when asked why, the city's attorney said they can't talk about it, even though it's all part of the public process.
It feeds into the animosity of this entire project that things are not truly transparent.
I don't think you can use today's Corporation Council advice not to talk about the potential lawsuit is a lack of a transparency. It's just a sensible thing to do.
The city is playing defense, not talking because Bombardier still has time to appeal and take it back to court. Meanwhile, the council punted on Berg's replay resolution until next month, when Bombardier executives can line up to testify in person. As to whether they'll get a do-over, well, that appears to be a Hail Mary.
We are against it primarily because the procurement ought to be independent of these forces from outside.
In the arena of the taxpayer, we need to make sure that what we're being told is actually the outcome.
At Honolulu Hale, Tim Sakahara, Hawaii News Now.
Thank you. Councilmember Berg.
I really want to get to the crux of this to understand for the residents who, like myself, aren't experts in the procurement law.
Correct.
I find that the actions of Bombardier, whereby on November 15th, they submitted confidential comments, in quotes, confidential comments, criticizing the wording, stating that it could not accept such language. And the reason I bring this up is on Farrington Highway in my district, government has put up the wrong signage. It's Plantation Road. For years it says Old Government Road. And ever since I got into office, they've said, can you fix this? I could see a construction crew, someone who got the contract to put up the sign, being responsible for any damages or wayward residents who lost their way and want to sue, that someone would say, wait a minute, who's responsible for putting up the wrong signage? So when someone makes confidential comments saying, you know, I'm in this business, I've been doing rail cars all around in every continent on the globe, I'm in this business, and I'm asking you for clarity. And that seems to me that when I'm looking at these things date after date after date after date, they're trying to save us money. They're trying to exercise due diligence and ask for clarity. So when government puts up the wrong signs, we've had the airport signage. Remember that example as well. Tourists will come here and say, I don't know which way to go. So when government makes the mistake, I'm looking at a contractor who's exercising, because the other two could just say, we'll just go to court and deal with it then. Here's my bid. I don't really care. We'll fight it when the fight comes. I'm looking at a contract, or a bidder rather, who's saying, I don't want to wait for that time when government puts up the wrong sign and I had to put it up. I'm waiting, and my question is, the confidential comments, will we ever know what those confidential comments are in this discussion, or does Bombardier have the ability, when they come up, to offer what those confidential comments are? Because, again, my inquiry here, Chair, of why I'm talking about this at length is that I'm looking at all this paperwork of a bidder asking for clarity. And the clarity of the response, the city declined to respond to Bombardier's submission of confidential comments, refused to respond to clarity on the confidential comments, responded on February 24th, 2011. Bombardier's price proposal was again conditioned on the deletion of certain identification. So Bombardier, to me, has gone out time and time again to say, help me, I want to clarify, because just in case government gets it wrong, am I liable? Can I get a cap and protect my business when government can't put the right signage up? Can you answer confidential comments? Can we know what those confidential comments are, or not?
I don't have the confidential comments today. Perhaps Bombardier can reveal them if they choose. The two confidential comments are discussed in the decision and order that relate to this particular provision. There are no other confidential comments that relate to that. When it states that the city did not respond, there's no process by which the city responds privately to one bidder or another in terms of responding to written comments. What the city does is the city communicates to all so that there's never an issue of fairness or disparate treatment between the members. So following that, the confidential comments that were received, which I think were in approximately November of 2010, following that in December, the city issued two different questions from bidders related to Section 2.13, which is the indemnification language we're talking about. And in those questions from bidders, the city unambiguously stated no change would be made to that section. So I think it's, while there was not a direct response to Bombardier, to say that the city did not respond to the question and make itself known that it was not willing to make that change, I think that that's not an accurate statement.
If I can, Chair, you know, now knowing the numbers, at the time the numbers couldn't be disclosed because it's confidential at that time. We want to make sure we're getting the best value in this procurement process. But now that we know the numbers, and the city all along has known these numbers, did it ever come a point in time where the city said, we have a differential of $234 million. We have a criteria where Bombardier says, I'll assemble these rail cars here, give you 150 jobs local. This whole thing's been pitched. Jobs, people off the bench. So did the city take into account that, since you guys knew the numbers and we didn't at the time, take into account that, wow, we got a possibility of saving the taxpayer, $234 million. We can infuse 150 jobs if we could just work with one of the bidders on the so-called, we're not going to budge, we're not going to change, we're not going to alter our requisites, but rather look at it and say, here's someone who's in the business, knows what they're doing, puts out a quality product, far greater of better value than Ansaldo. So everything that I'm reading in here seems like we're just following the law. We're following the law, and there's lack of emotion, lack of dollar signs to save the taxpayer, defend the taxpayer, that you're just following the protocol. At what point in time did you put protocol away and say, if you ever tried, I want to save the taxpayer money, I want to provide jobs, and I think the criteria over here of another bidder is greater than, and offer them a way that you wouldn't disclose anything to harm the process, but rather say, look, on December 8th, I'm not going to respond this way to your confidential comments. I'm going to rather give you an opportunity to clarify, because you had a teleconference call as well on October 27th. And it seems to me that each time I look at these communications, someone who's an expert in the field is trying to guide you folks, trying to help you out, trying to help save us money, trying to create us jobs. And it seems that every point in time through this 6 inches is the city says, I don't want the best bang for our dollar. I don't want to create local jobs. I want to make sure we give it to one of the worst companies that is in this business. So I'm frustrated, very frustrated, that when I'm looking at confidential comments, that there's no response. You're gonna toe the line. You're gonna shut the doors on these guys, and that shares my frustration. It's really not a question. It's just frustration. I'm looking at $234 million being flushed down the toilet, and we're getting a contractor who doesn't really know how to build rail cars. I'm upset with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
In the name of God, do your duty.
Councilmember Burke.
You've been had. I'm speaking on behalf of the taxpayers of District 1. You went for a ride. You got taken. All right. With that said, I have a resolution 11-248 to provide remedy for this council of integrity. If this council wants to act with integrity, you have a resolution before you that says start the process over. You said you won't add a penny more to your proposal. $234 million is pretty important to my district. Very important. We got flooding issues, we got sewer rates going up, and I think that going to battle for $234 million is worth a resolution to pass to make a statement. With that said, you mentioned evidentiary. You mentioned something of when you came before this process with DCCA, that what you just showed this council and the public, and I hope everybody watching TV paid attention to what you said. The majority of what you exposed here today and exhibited was not allowable before the DCCA hearing. Is that correct?
I was not allowed to say a word.
Basically, with the information that you said that said, look, here's 2 other bidders, they got to change, they were given time to correct. You mentioned ADA compliant. My goodness, is Ansaldo gave correction? Question, did Ansaldo put down a proposal that would not meet ADA requirements?
I don't know. I saw the comment. They seem to have some kind of problem with the floor height of the car, which is not compliant with ADA. That's the comment of an evaluator.
Good answer.
That will have to be fixed.
Could have to be fixed. But they got the contract, didn't they? Or the award, rather.
Award.
They got the award. So we see flaws of your exhibits here that DCCA could not take into an account. I was listening to this, and if I had a box of Kleenex, I would have left the room. I'm in tears. I am really in tears, sir. I can't believe the way this city has treated you. The lawyers are feeding off the trough, the taxpayers' trough, and I'm livid right now. I'm trying to hold back. I'm trying to be as professional as possible here for my district. And I'm trying to contain myself, Chair. And I'm trying to limit my questions because I know that there's a member on the other side of this table that's irritated with my commentary. And he shows mannerisms. What's your question? What's your question?
Okay,
Let me keep asking a question to you then. Let me keep this going. Chair, thank you. With your prior knowledge that I know of on this issue is that you've offered on the table to October of a date and saying, city, taxpayer, mayor of Honolulu, I'm putting this out on the table for you guys to jump on. If you want to save money for the taxpayer, if you want to create jobs in your local economy, I got my stuff out on the table for you to jump on. Is that correct? Wasn't there a date of October, end of October?
Yes.
So in other words, you currently are still offering this body, the mayor, to take a recourse. Is that correct?
Yes.
You're giving us an opportunity. Since you mentioned that the FTA isn't going to do anything probably till October-ish, a year of 2012, you're also stating that there's plenty of time for the mayor to act on behalf of the taxpayer. Correct?
That's what I believe.
So the
yes.
mayor, question, has the mayor done anything to your knowledge and communicated with you folks and said, wow, you could save the taxpayer $234 million. How can I help? Has he made any anything towards you?
No. We have no communication with him.
I want to add that I went to a Heart Rail status meeting at Kapolei probably 10 days ago or within the past couple weeks. And it was mentioned in my question back and forth with Mr. Torio Hamiyasu. It was regarding the fact that if you were indeed to fill out the form of condition and made it applicable like the others, your price would then go up. You've just refuted that today, that if you said, if I'm treated the same as everyone else here, I'm not adding a penny to this proposal. Can you clarify that for me? Because the information I got at this town hall meeting that Hart put on was that you guys were in error, you made a flaw, and if you played apples to apples like everyone else, your bid, your proposal would go up. Can you clarify that?
At the DCCA hearing, you know, we saw the ruling from the hearings officer, and he had this theory that he used in his decision that somehow we were trying to obtain a lower price. There was absolutely zero evidence for him to come to that conclusion. I think probably what happened is he saw that Sumitomo question that I have in your packet there, because they made a reference to price, and it seemed to, he was led to believe, I believe, that that was our question. So somehow we were trying to game the system. It's zero evidence of that. And I'm telling you now, we would not increase the price at all for this issue.
Have you seen Resolution 11-248 that I've introduced that so graciously the chair of the Budget Committee, I'm not a voting member of this committee, so I'm very grateful that the Budget Chair is hearing this out. Have you read the Resolution 11-248? Do you have any problems with this resolution?
You know, a lot of it is, seems to be, I think you adopted a lot of the information that I've put out there. I wrote an open letter to Hart, and it looks like you've adopted a lot of that information. So, you know, in that regard, obviously I'm in agreement with what you've said here. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, it's up for the council. It's not really something for me to comment on, but obviously I agree with the thrust of it, and I think a rebid would be a good remedy at this point.
You know, Chair, if I can add, you know, I have absolutely no relationship with this company. I've never met with you one-on-one. I've never telephoned you. In my engagement for Council District 1, for who I represent, I'm hitting you up on the table, one-on-one, in front of these cameras, as they expect me to. I have no idea what is right, wrong, good, plus, up, down. From what I've read here, I'm looking at something as a travesty. Like I said, you've been taken for a ride. And I find that the evidence that you've brought forward today that you were denied, could not bring forward in the so-called process of protocol, that everything that's been exhibited here today, I'm just hoping, maybe the sooner I be quiet, maybe my colleagues will be more apt to vote in favor of this. Maybe the longer I keep talking, they may have a different opinion. But I'm going to have to wrap this up so that they will entertain this resolution that the chair has put on the agenda, 11-248. With that said, would you consider adding other language in here that you could see a fault? I'll ask you again. This is asking, in this be it resolved clause, it's asking that the process start over and allow for the taxpayer to win. This is what it's all about. It's not about you. It really isn't about you. It's about the taxpayer. And this resolution is about letting the taxpayer win. Not Ansaldo win, but the taxpayer. So what would you add to the be it resolved? Can you give us one clue what you think is flawed in here before this committee? Because I'm not a voting member. I need to ask you this now because I'm not going to be able to do anything of a vote to get this through. So I'm asking you before I have to stop talking. What do you think is absolutely necessary for my colleagues on here to see it as the taxpayer sees it?
Well, first of all, let me say, I believe mistakes were made in this procurement process. That happens, but then it's very hard to admit that mistakes were made.
So
I think that's the thrust of what's going on.
You didn't get a 48-hour chance, did you?
No.
So when you brought up Phoenix, you were given an opportunity, and you wound up winning the award, and Phoenix, the taxpayer, saved money.
Yes.
In this instance of what did not go before DCCA, is that you wanted to tell DCCA, and then the appeal on the DCCA, you wanted to say, look, I wasn't given a 48-hour opportunity, 36, 48 hours, according to the HRS that you showed, but you couldn't argue that point. Is that correct?
There was a ruling for summary motion. The city won that, and I wasn't able to say anything.
Okay, so again, the 48-hour of, I see a flaw in your proposal, you have 48 hours to correct this. For instance, ADA, non-compliant, you got time to correct this. You were not afforded the time to correct this. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councilmember Berg.
I apologize, colleagues, for reacting on behalf of the taxpayer in the manner I did, and I don't mean to put anyone down of anybody. These are comments between me and my District 1, and not to be taken amongst you that I'm upset with you folks. Please hold that true. But my comment is, I don't agree, I don't get to vote, but I'm not in favor of your deferral recommendation. Number one, we've heard two things. I can understand Bombardier saying, I've had it with this town, see ya. I could understand Bombardier saying, I've got this on the table to the end of October, you want to jump on it, take it. We're going to allow and watch that if this resolution, which is really a symbolic resolution, it doesn't say anything. It's not a legal document that Bombardier is going to take into court. It's really telling the mayor to get his act together. This is really all this does. It's just telling the mayor, do you want to be a mayor who's going to save $234 million? Do you want to be a mayor that wants to provide and infuse jobs on this project or give the jobs to California? Do you, mayor, want to take a position on behalf of the taxpayer? Do you, mayor, want to do something that the DCCA would not take into account? Being a prosecuting attorney, this mayor of ours knows the legal wranglings, and he has an opportunity to use his expertise, use his background, use his ability of that executive position to take this lead. Right now, I can understand the comments that this is not in the domain or purview of the council, that we do not take sides. We're not taking sides. This doesn't say anything in this resolution one over the other. It doesn't do any of that. It doesn't take a side. All this resolution does is say, on behalf of the taxpayer, we've been apprised that we could save money. Please, Mr. Mayor, take action and save us money. That's all this does. There's no spin in this language. None. So deferral will, in essence, when I hear the vote cast, I will hear the toilet flush. And I will watch $234 million go down the drain. And I'm going to have weak knees the rest of this day. And I will find that box of Kleenex. Thank you, Chair.
Any further discussion?
In the name of God, do your duty.
My name is Andy Robbins. I am the Vice President, Business Development for Bombardier. I have a bit of a cold, so I'll try to talk over that. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. Through this whole process and the protests, the DCCA hearing, into the circuit court, I've never had a chance to provide any testimony or provide any evidence. I'll explain why not, but I really appreciate the chance to speak to you today to tell you our story. I'm primarily here representing my fellow employees at Bombardier, our suppliers and our subcontractors, and several local companies who worked so hard with us over almost 3 years to deliver the city and county of Honolulu a first-class proposal for the core systems for this really very important project. They were successful in delivering the highest scoring proposal according to the city's own evaluation team, as well as putting together the lowest total price that together represented the best value to the city. Unfortunately, this did not result in an award to us, and worse, our proposal was disqualified and not even considered. And now I have to tell you, in our headquarters in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we are facing about 50 layoffs directly related to this situation. on a project that was funded with U.S. taxpayer dollars. And somehow I have to explain to these folks that those jobs are going to Italy now. But for you, I know your principal reason for being here today is to represent the best interests of the taxpayers of Honolulu, and I respect that. And that's really what this whole procurement process was supposed to be about. Not individual preferences, not individual career goals or political goals of people, but about the city being an agent for the taxpayer to ensure that the best value proposal, the one that had the highest scoring technical and management proposal, and the best total price was chosen for the all-important core systems contract. Because this is the contract that provides the trains, the technology, the operating system, as well as the operations and maintenance for a long period of time. It's a vital contract. I have to tell you, I mean, we've always felt that the city and their attorneys, I hope I can speak and make a presentation.
Oh, yes.
Is that okay? Thank you.
As briefly as possible.
Okay, I'll do the best I can, but this is information I don't believe you've had before, so I think it's very important for you to hear it. You know, we've always felt that the city representatives, their attorneys, never really understood the liability issue. That's been confirmed for me today, beyond doubt. They don't understand it, and I'll explain to you the facts. I also heard an allegation at the beginning about somehow we were trying to get a price advantage through taking some kind of exception on liability. Totally false. And you know, really what's been going on here is an incredible cover story. I realize attorneys come in at protest periods and legal proceedings and they try to protect their client. I understand that, but I've been here through the whole process, all the give and take and back and forth and meetings, and what we're hearing here is an incredible cover story. And maybe that the attorney's doing his job, but it's weaving fact and fiction together to make it all sound really good. And I'm going to explain to you the truth about that. So if you don't mind, I made some presentation boards, and I'd like to run through these, and I'll do my best to keep it concise, and but it's important information, so I hope you let me present it. First of all, what is the scope of work for the core systems contract? You can see here, this is right out of the RFP. It's a single D-BOM contract, design, build, O&M, one contract, to provide the vehicles, provide all of the operating systems, design it, manufacture, install, and then go into a long-term operations and period. One contract. Next slide. Here's the first sign of trouble. March 21st, when the award was made to Ansaldo, the mayor's office put out a press release. If you go down to 5th paragraph, 6th paragraph, that's bolded on the bottom. You have these in front of you. Ansaldo was selected as the winning bidder for the $574 million core systems contract. False. It's not $574 million. This deception started right there, and I'll explain to you why. Because it completely ignored the operations and maintenance scope. Okay, it's a misrepresentation of what this whole contract was about. They were boasting about a 27% reduction under their estimate, and maybe that's why they only revealed the design build part and left out the O&M part. I don't know. As a matter of fact, our representatives were in the room that day and heard city representatives say that the O&M would be negotiated later. You can't do that under a single D-BOM contract. O&M is a fixed price, part of the proposal. It's all together. There's no negotiation later to kind of separate that. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So what I did after that press release is the next day the project file was made available down in the Division of Purchasing downstairs here. And we started to look through the file to find out what the O&M prices were. The first hurdle we had is that you'll see from this slide here, the example from the Sumitomo price form for O&M, you can see the prices for each year of operation as well as the total. Someone redacted the Ansaldo form, even taking out the heading, so you really couldn't figure out, you know, what period of time, what part of the contract is that $339 million for. It was covered up. So we had to go and file government request for government records, and that's when we finally got the numbers. They were not made available originally. If you go to the next slide, and this was in your resolution, here are all of the real numbers for the final proposal, the second BAFO. See, the press release, when it talked about $574 million, made it seem that Bombardier was the high bidder in the information that was released to the press, because that was just the first part of the contract. When you add in all of the O&M components, all of a sudden the picture changes. And in fact, Bombardier had the lowest total price of all three bidders. We had to get that information. Next slide. Also in the project file was the scoring. There was a 6-member evaluation team that the city put together to evaluate all three bids. And what you find when you go through that is that consistently on the technical and management part of the proposal, Bombardier was consistently ranked #1, the initial proposal into the second BAFO. Sumitomo was ranked #2, Ansaldo #3. So this is the quality of the bid, the technical components, the management components. When you add in the price components, in the initial proposal, Bombardier was still ranked #1. Now Ensaldo was ranked #2, Sumitomo 3rd. For the second BAFO, because of this disqualification, the city did not complete its scoring of the Bombardier proposal. So I put those numbers in red on the bottom of this slide because the score for price, the 2,028 points, that's right out of the Hawaii statutes. It's just a formula. So if we were not disqualified, we would have received 28 points for price. And the 708 points for price realism came from a technical expert committee that the city put together. The expert committee comes up with a consolidated or consensus score, and then they advance that to the selection committee. That expert committee had awarded us 708 points for price realism. So it's a good guess as to what the final score would be. And when you add all that together, you see that Bombardier would have been ranked #1 and probably would have been awarded this contract had we not been disqualified. Now, you know, it's been said that the raw price numbers are kind of a mix and match between escalated dollars and unescalated dollars. Well, it turns out that the city did a net present value or life cycle cost analysis to make it all in the same basis, all in the same dollars. This was not made available either in the project file. We had to request this through government records request. And what you see in the top left corner is the total life cycle cost analysis from the city themselves, showing that Bombardier had the lowest total life cycle cost over the 18-year period of this contract. That's the city's own analysis. Okay, now I would like to explain this liability issue that you've heard about, so much about. And maybe I can correct some misinformation for you. You know, this was a 3-year process that we went through, and 47 addenda to the RFP, all kinds of delays in the schedule. You know, the proposal due dates were changed consistently. There were deadlines on when we could ask questions. Those were changed. We were constantly going under pressure thinking the proposal was due and then it would get extended. When the RFP was initially released in 2009, the RFP language in regard to liability indemnification did not have any cap on liability at all. There was unlimited liability to the core systems contractors, which means that we have to indemnify or pay the city, defend the city, and hold the city harmless for everything connected to the work and all contract obligations, everything. That's an unlimited liability. We have had something like 30 contracts like this project in the United States alone. We don't have any unlimited liability contracts. So we requested of the city to consider a cap on liability. It's normal. And as a matter of fact, Sumitomo also requested the cap. Sumitomo and ourselves are experienced in North America in doing these kind of contracts. And what I found out when I reviewed the contract file is Sumitomo was asking for all the same things we were. So we had a meeting with the city, finally. We requested, we wrote questions asking for a cap on liability. We had one-on-one meetings where we asked, could we meet with somebody from Corp Counsel to discuss this? We finally were granted that meeting. and 2 members of Corp Council showed up. One never said anything. The other one maybe had about 8 or 9 years experience. We never got the impression that she was very familiar with the contract, or, you know, it's probably not unusual. You don't see $1 billion contract every day at the city. But she did her best. She listened. We had a good discussion on this issue of liability. The meeting ended with her saying we would consider a cap. And we got a very favorable impression that the city was going to grant a cap after that meeting. Now, another 3 months go by before we hear anything. We finally get a written addendum where it says, yes, we're going to add a cap on liability. It's going to be capped at 100% of the contract value, which is, you know, close to $1 billion. Okay? Now, the cap does not include any claims from third parties. You can't cap a third party. I know there are lawyers here. A contract is between the 2 parties. I can't create a contract with the city and prevent some third party from suing us. You just can't do it. So that is totally false what you heard today. We never requested a cap on third party claims. It's outrageous that the city would even think that that's part of this proposal. It does not include any claims on third party. That's outside the cap. And there are other traditional carve-outs from a cap on liability. Anything that's covered by insurance is carved out. It's not included because you can claim to insurance. Any negligence, gross negligence, fraud, you know, if we're found to have gross negligence, that's carved out of the cap, not included. The mistake in the way that the city wrote the language, though, in the RFP when they added this cap is they never changed the next paragraph, which was the indemnification clause, which also excluded and carved out of the cap all other liabilities. So basically, the way that the language read is we're giving you this cap on liability at 100% of contract value. But then in the next paragraph, oh, by the way, everything is excluded from the cap. That's faulty language. It's drafting language. It's a mistake. They didn't mean that. There's no way possible that the city meant to carve out everything from a cap that they just agreed to give. Okay, it's just faulty language. Maybe somebody who wrote it did not really understand what they were writing. So we proceeded from that point on to try to have a dialogue and explain that in written questions, in one-on-one meetings. And what we find now is, now that this has become an issue after the fact and we were improperly disqualified on this point, now there's a cover story to say we meant to exclude everything from the cap. We gave you the cap, yes, but we also meant to exclude everything from the cap. That is ridiculous. If I could go to the next slide. Why did we make a big deal out of this? Why did we want to point this out? Well, right in the RFP, section 1.3.6, if any mistake, error, or ambiguity is identified by the priority listed offerer at any time during the process in any of the documents supplied by the city, we have a duty to notify the city of the needed correction. It's an obligation that a contractor point out faulty language, something wrong. And that's what we were trying to do over and over. You know, we didn't want to go and make this into a claim. It turns out that Sumitomo dropped this issue, okay, in the final BAFO. And we asked ourselves why. They actually had it as a clarification, just like we did in the initial proposal. They dropped it in the final proposal, and we asked ourselves, why did they do that? The only thing we could think of is they figured, well, it's faulty language, it's unenforceable, and down the line, if this issue ever comes up, we'll claim, we'll fight it, we'll make a claim out of it. Bombardier does not operate like that. We did not want to do that. We didn't want to make these anti-rail critics right, that you're going to get all these claims on this project and the costs are going to escalate. We wanted clarity now. We wanted to get this contract right now. Okay? If I could go to the next slide. You know, the city's story on this issue, did they tell us, did they not tell us, it keeps changing. Okay? In the debrief session that we had after we found out that we were disqualified, Mr. Mott, who is a consultant representative for the city, for the old RTD, he says that in the initial proposal he was talking about the language this clarification language that we were disqualified on, it was reviewed by all the evaluators, but no one determined that it was conditional. This is during the first proposal. That's what Mr. Mott said. We asked, you would have told Bombardier if you thought it was conditional? Mm-hmm. We would. That might have been one alternative, or we could have said it's a condition, we're not going to accept it, and we're going to reject it at that point. So you don't recall at that September 22nd meeting suggesting that Bombardier dropped the language? No. So they reviewed our language in the initial proposal and decided it was not conditional. Okay, but then in the final proposal, all of a sudden it was found conditional and we were disqualified. So what you have here is the response from the city on June 23rd of this year to our initial protest when we were arguing that we were improperly disqualified. And in the second paragraph, what the city says is, no, they never really evaluated in the first proposal. They never evaluated this language, this clarification language. They never, maybe even never saw it. They never evaluated it. They never scored our proposal. We're wrong about that because we've been saying they didn't score. They did score our proposal. They never found the language conditional. Only at the end, after 3 proposals, did all of a sudden they find us conditional. So the story now changes on June 23rd from yes, we saw it, we talked about it, to no, we didn't talk about it, we didn't review it. This is what I mean by a legal defense. Okay, then, if I could go to the next slide. Here's an example. This is actually the evaluation form. One of the evaluation forms from the 6 evaluators that the city had. And I know it's hard to read, but it's in front of you here. But one of the other things the city said, we said if you look at the top of the form in your packet, there's 3 criteria to determine if we're responsive or not. And we were found responsive and responsible in each one. In the protest denial, the city said, oh, that doesn't really mean what you think it means. It's just a checklist. It doesn't really mean that we reviewed everything for responsiveness. Okay, and then by the way, you can see that this initial proposal, we had a score at the bottom. So unlike what the June 23rd letter said, we were fully scored. Our proposal was fully scored. No one found us non-responsive or having some condition. If you go to the next one. Okay, here's the initial evaluation from the same committee on March the 2nd to our second BAFO. You look at the top. We were still considered responsive and responsible. Now, this was a partial score. They hadn't yet opened the price book. Okay, so the score was not complete. Now, in that price book is where we tried to clarify this liability language. So then you go to the next evaluation form. So now the city has all of a sudden determined we have a condition. So they zeroed out our score. We were disqualified. Now look at the top. Now they changed the checklist at the top to say, oh yeah, you're not responsive. You're not compliant. You see on the top, all of a sudden, the third box now says not responsive. And the note on the bottom says they're not responsive because of this clarification. So this allegation in the June 23rd letter that, oh, we didn't review your proposal, we didn't check it, those boxes don't mean what you think it means. It's totally false. If I could go to the next slide. And by the way, we had a one-on-one meeting with the city on September 22nd. On the agenda was to discuss our assumptions and exceptions, as the city called them. So how could they have that on the agenda if they never saw it, never evaluated it? And at that meeting, we discussed this liability issue. I brought it up personally. And Mr. Mott, the representative, the procurement representative for the city, said, oh, you know, because we brought up this issue, how can you have a cap and then completely circumvent it? His response was, that sounds like a mistake. We'll look into it. Okay? Now, they deny saying that at the meeting, but at least 2 of us wrote that in our notes, and I was there and I heard it myself. So this whole issue of liability is totally misunderstood by the city. Now, even with all of that, in the Hawaii Administrative Rules, which I have here, there's requirements for discussions. And this is really what our court case was based on. If the city decides to have discussions, which they did, here is the guidelines for having discussions. And you see the very first point. One of the main purposes for having discussions is to advise the priority listed offerers of weaknesses, significant weaknesses, or deficiencies in their proposal. And they did that. They did that about the doors on the car, the windows on the car. You would think an item that was going to disqualify us would be part of the discussions, but it was not. I was so shocked on March 21st when I was disqualified because it was never discussed that that would disqualify our proposal. So they did not follow the requirements for discussions. Okay, and there was a whole timeline of events that happened over these 3 years. In addition to the written questions and answers, where we tried to bring up these issues, we also had one-on-one meetings. I mentioned the meeting where we did have Corp Counsel, January 21st, 2010. That's when we talked about adding the cap. We had 2 members of Corp Counsel. As I said, one never said anything. The other one didn't seem very familiar with the issues. Where were the experienced people from Corp Counsel that we could talk to? I've heard Ms. Kondo is a very experienced attorney for the city. I never met her until the protest. Why wasn't she assigned to meet with us on a $1 billion contract and meet with the other offerers? We never had anybody experienced to talk to at the city. The cap was added on April the 14th, 2010. On May the 6th, it was changed a little bit and put into the RFP officially. You can see how time is going by, and the proposal is imminently due. Okay, on September 22nd, I mentioned, it was on the agenda to talk about liability. We were told they meant to have a cap. Maybe the language is a mistake. Okay, this is what we were led to believe. It's a mistake. It's just faulty language. Maybe it'll get fixed. Well, it was never fixed. So we felt like there was no choice but to clarify it in our proposal. That's all it was. We weren't trying to exclude third-party claims. Totally ridiculous. And then on February 7th, or well, before that, October 27th, this is now prior to the first BAFO, we have a teleconference with the city. And in the teleconference, the city says, we're having this teleconference to point out areas where you can strengthen your proposal. It's very normal before a BAFO. The city's trying to get the best deal. That's fine. But again, no mention of this liability issue. They would give you just general warnings that, oh yeah, make sure you don't take any exceptions that may deem you non-responsive. Nothing related to this liability issue that this was going to disqualify us. No discussion. And then on February 7th, this is a teleconference now before the second BAFO. Yet another chance. Now we've presented it in 2 proposals, this liability issue. Now we're in a teleconference before the final BAFO. Talked about the windows and the doors again. Not a word about this liability issue. If I could go to the next slide. The city says, well, we can have these meetings, but nothing that the city says can be relied upon. How can you have meaningful discussions if we can't rely upon anything that's said? Okay, now, yes, it's a good idea to confirm it in writing. So the city points to this question that was asked about the liability issue before the BAFO in addendum number 44, question number 67. Now, one of the little tricks that's made is in the DCCA hearing, and in court, the attorneys for the city make it sound like we asked this question. Sumitomo asked this question. That's in the public record. This is Sumitomo's question. So they made a comment about having an impact on pricing. That was used against us to make it seem like somehow this liability clarification was being used by us to come up with a lower price. This was not our question. There's no way to calculate a price on going above a cap on liability. We have absolutely, price had nothing to do with this issue for us. But if you look at this question that Sumitomo asked, okay, look at this question. They say, please confirm or clarify that the city does not intend to render the cap meaningless and provide a way to circumvent it by excluding everything. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what the first point says. Sumitomo asked the city, please confirm or clarify. All the city had to do is say confirmed, and we would have all gotten it, okay? Or they could have said, no, it's a mistake, we'll fix the language. What do they say? No change. And this is what the city points to as being unambiguous about the issue. No change. And we were supposed to read into that and figure out, oh yeah, they really mean to circumvent a cap. What we read into that is that they still didn't understand the issue. All they had to do is say, we really mean to circumvent the cap. As ridiculous as it was, we would have had to deal with it. Now they're saying that, we'll drop the clarification if that's really what's going to disqualify us, and we'll have to deal with it later. It's not our preference to do that, but if that's the rules of the game, we'll do it. No change. We were supposed to figure out they really meant to circumvent the cap. It's ridiculous. Next slide, please. And I'm wrapping up. I know time is short. Yeah. After all of that, everything I just said, faulty language, lack of meaningful discussions, the HARs have this clause. It says that a proposal shall be rejected for reasons, including but not limited to. And look at B. Well, A, of course, is if it's a non-responsible, meaning we don't have the financial resources, what have you. Look at B. The proposal, after any opportunity has passed for modification or clarification, fails to meet the announced requirements of the agency. What is this saying? It's saying that if there's some sentence in this 14-volume proposal, tens of thousands of sentences that we wrote, if there's some sentence that the city finds objectionable or thinks is an exception or something wrong, they are given the opportunity by the HARs to come back to us and say, you know, we don't like this sentence. You have 48 hours to remove it. This is very normal, and it's right in the code. They never did that. They played gotcha, we gotcha, you're out. It's wrong. You know, the whole point of that HAR is, again, the city is supposed to be an agent for the taxpayer. Get the best deal. You don't just throw the best value out because of one sentence. You say, wait a minute, the sentence is no good, we don't like it. If you want we want you, you have a great deal. If we want you, you need to get rid of that sentence. It's allowed, it's the way it's supposed to work. And I'll give you an example of that. We've actually confronted this issue once before. We did a proposal for the city of Phoenix. And by the way, Hawaii procurement law is modeled after Arizona procurement law. Okay, so this is relevant. In 2009, we did a proposal for the city of Phoenix. They liked our proposal, but they had a problem with something we wrote in the proposal, and you can read in this letter. The city of Phoenix has received Bombardier's final proposal. The proposal includes conditions that Phoenix previously rejected. Now, we dispute that we had a condition, but they felt like we had a condition. So what did Phoenix do? You have until 5 p.m. on Wednesday, February 11th, to remedy this, to withdraw that condition. This is the way the process is supposed to work. We did that. We're building the project right now. The city got the best deal. That's the way the procurement code was meant to be and used. The city did not do that here. Next. Now, you know, I've been asked, why is Bombardier the only one of 3 bidders that is in this situation? Well, it turns out, and you can imagine, when you have a 14-volume proposal, there's going to be something in there that is objectionable to your customer. And it turns out that both Ansaldo and Sumitomo also had exceptions in their proposal. It's not unreasonable that there's going to be something in everybody's 14-volume proposal that is not quite right. You don't throw the whole proposal out for that. So I gave you 2 examples here, and there are more. In Ensaldo, these are cuts from the city's own evaluation of the Ansaldo and Sumitomo proposal. And what you see in the first one is, under discussion point on the left-hand side, floor height now uncertain as a new cross-section drawing raised to non-ADA compliant, floor height. So what they're saying is Ensaldo does not meet the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay? Now, I'm not saying they should have disqualified Ansaldo. They should have, if Ansaldo had the best proposal, they should have gone to Ansaldo and said, hey, this is unacceptable. You have to meet ADA. Fix it. We give you 48 hours to fix it. Okay, this is how the process is supposed to work. Sumitomo, the proposal to locate the cable in the emergency walkway instead of in the box section was not approved when it was submitted as an RFI. So that Sumitomo asked earlier, before the proposal was due, can we change the arrangement of the cables? The answer was no. And there was also a question that we asked, can we change the arrangement of the cables? The answer was no. Sumitomo changed the arrangement of the cables anyway, non-compliant. Okay? Again, if they had the best proposal, I wouldn't throw them out. I'd tell them that's unacceptable. You got to remove that. So everyone had exceptions. We were the only one disqualified. So I'll wrap up with this slide.
I don't know that we're getting into the features of the.
No, this is just a wrap up.
Okay, because we're not getting into.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's fine.
That's light.
we actually have no say over procurement. It's
Right.
a matter of fact. So we're not getting into the details.
Okay, this is in your packet. I won't
Right,
speak
it's
about
in the
it.
packet.
Yep.
Yeah.
So just to conclude, the bottom line about this core systems contract selection is that the city and HART staff either simply did not understand the Hawaii Procurement Code, which I believe is true, or they felt that they could make any decision that they wanted. And both DCCA and the courts appear to give broad deference to the city in this regard. But I question whether this is really in the best interest of the city and the taxpayers. Our proposal was improperly disqualified due to faulty RFP language that the city failed to understand. We were never afforded meaningful discussions to try to remedy this situation. And even if the city truly believed that Bombardier submitted a qualified proposal, it failed to allow Bombardier to address this issue as provided for in the HARS, and thereby afford itself of accepting the highest scoring solution with the lowest price, which clearly would have been in the best interest of the taxpayers. And that's what the whole solicitation process is about. I urge the city to consider this resolution and exercise its budget authority over HART to remedy this situation. There is time to get this right and regain the trust of the public. According to HART, a full funding grant agreement from the federal government is now not expected until September or October of 2012. And I know that this council has passed a bond measure for the project to leverage your GET funds, but I don't believe council wanted to spend local money until they received the federal full funding grant agreement. So you're not really going to get the substantial amount of money going into this project until next September at the earliest. There's more than enough time to get this core systems contract right. This contract is vital to the whole success of the project, and I ask for your consideration of this matter.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
questions for Mr. Robbins?
You have a transportation committee that is in its entirety pro-rail. There's no dissension. There's no democracy. What made Berg snap? Why was his order and decorum unbecoming?
This measure on order and decorum, the whole public is now talking about, is for the sole and only purpose to stop Councilmember Tom Berg from exposing the truth about the deception from the city and HART misleading the public about rail.
So now the public and the people need to know that if 12-206 does indeed pass, the behavior of a council member that is deemed lacking of decorum, lacking in order, that I'm hoping the media and my colleagues here and the public at large say, let's not focus this on anyone's behavior. Let's focus on the message. Let's focus on what brought the blood to boil. Let's focus on information being squashed, sequestered, prohibited, denied. Let's focus on anybody who is living paycheck to paycheck like I am. I'd be scared as heck to try to get the truth out next time. I'd be scared as heck to raise my voice because anybody could just say, guess what? I'm not only going to not just call the cops on you, I'm going to take your pay. So, this is Big Brother, Big Government, coming in of this council.
Expel me! Expel me! me, not him. When it gathers a fall, it's a crime against the people who sent me here, and I committed it. Every word that boy said is the truth. Every word about Taylor and me and graft and the rotten political corruption of my state. Every word of it is true. I'm not fit for office. I'm not fit for any place of honor or trust. Expel me!
God. Do your duty.